Okay, so you want to open a restaurant? You've got the recipes? You've got the passion? Friends and family have always said your cooking is good enough to sell? Rent a space, hire a small crew, put your food in front of people, and watch the tables fill up every night? Restaurants are everywhere. People eat out constantly, and the global food service industry is worth well over $1 trillion. It feels like one of the last businesses where raw talent alone should be enough to succeed. So here's the question worth asking before you sign a commercial lease. If people clearly love eating out this much, why do roughly 60% of new restaurants fail within their first year and nearly 80% within 5? The answer is that a restaurant was never really in the business of selling food. It's in the business of managing perishable inventory, unpredictable human labor, and razor-thin margins simultaneously every single day, with almost zero room for error. The food is simply the part customers see, understand what's happening underneath it, and every brutal statistic in this industry starts to make sense. Start with the margins, because this is where the fantasy collapses first. A well-run restaurant typically operates on a net profit margin of just 3% to 6%. That means on every $100 a customer spends, the owner walks away with $3 to $6 after everything is paid. Compare that to almost any other small business, a service company, a retail shop, a consulting practice, most of which comfortably clear 15% to 25% margins. Restaurants operate this thin because two enormous cost categories eat almost all the revenue before profit ever enters the conversation. Food costs, typically 28% to 35% of revenue, and labor cost, typically another 28% to 35% of revenue. Add rent, utilities, insurance, marketing, equipment maintenance, and licensing fees on top of those two categories, and there's barely anything left over, even on a genuinely busy night. Now, here's the naive math trap that catches almost every first-time owner. You calculate that a plate costing you $8 in ingredients, sold for $24, gives you a healthy $16 profit per plate, and multiply that by how many plates you expect to sell in a month. On paper, that looks like real money. But in reality, that $16 doesn't account for the cook's wage to prepare it, the server's wage and tip out to deliver it, the dishwasher, the host, the manager on duty, the rent allocated to the square footage that table occupies, the electricity running the kitchen equipment, the entire shift, and the spoiled or wasted ingredients from the dishes that didn't sell that night. By the time all of that gets allocated, the actual profit per plate is a fraction of what the naive napkin math suggested, and on a slow Tuesday, it can easily be negative. Then there's the perishability problem, which has no equivalent in most other businesses. A clothing store's inventory sitting unsold for a week is merely inconvenient. A restaurant's inventory sitting unsold for a week is often garbage. Produce spoils, proteins expire, prepared items lose quality within hours. Every ingredient ordered represents a bet on how many customers will walk through the door and what they'll order, and that bet has to be made days in advance, before the owner has any real data on that particular week. Order too much, and spoiled inventory becomes pure loss with zero recovery value. Order too little, and the restaurant runs out of popular dishes mid-service, turning away paying customers and damaging its reputation in the same night. Labor compounds this problem in a different direction entirely. Restaurant staffing is famously unstable, with annual turnover rates in the industry regularly exceeding 70%, and in some markets and roles climbing well past 100%. Every departure means retraining costs, temporary understaffing, and inconsistent food quality while a new hire gets up to speed. Add in the physically demanding nature of kitchen work, the late nights, and historically low base wages for tip positions. And owners are constantly fighting to keep a functioning team assembled, often while simultaneously trying to run service themselves on a short-staffed night. This is where the real risk case in this industry becomes obvious, because unlike most small businesses, a restaurant's biggest threat isn't slow growth. It's a sudden shock it can't absorb because there's no financial cushion built into a 4% margin, a burst pipe closing the kitchen for 2 weeks, a health inspection failure requiring costly remediation, a key chef leaving abruptly during a busy season, a rent increase at lease renewal. Any single one of these events can be fatal to a restaurant operating this close to break even every single month. Restaurants don't typically die from one catastrophic mistake. They die from a string of ordinary bad luck that a business with real margin could have absorbed without noticing. So why does anyone still succeed at this? And what actually separates the restaurants that survive from the overwhelming majority that don't? It's rarely about the food being better. It's almost always about controlling costs, with a precision most first-time owners never develop until it's too late. Successful operators obsess over food cost percentage on every single dish, negotiate hard with suppliers, design menus specifically to reduce waste by reusing ingredients across multiple dishes, and relentlessly track labor hours against actual sales volume, hour by hour, rather than staffing based on gut feeling. Many of the restaurants that genuinely thrive also diversify revenue beyond the dining room itself. Catering contracts, private events, retail products like bottled sauces or baked goods, or a second, lower overhead concept like a food truck or ghost kitchen that shares the same commercial kitchen space without the cost of a second full dining room. And increasingly, the operators who build real wealth in this industry are the ones who stop thinking like a single restaurant and start thinking like a replicable system. A successful single location proves the concept works. A second and third location run off standardized recipes, centralized purchasing, and systems that don't depend entirely on the original owner cooking every dish personally is where actual scalable profit starts to appear, because fixed costs like recipe development, branding, and back-office systems get spread across multiple revenue streams instead of just one fragile dining room. Run the numbers on two versions of this career. In the realistic scenario, an owner opens a single 50-seat restaurant with $350,000 in startup costs, financed partly through savings and partly through a loan, generates $900,000 in annual revenue in a decent first full year, and after food costs, labor, rent, and overhead, nets somewhere around $30,000 to $45,000 in owner profit, a return that after the hours worked often computes to less than minimum wage once actual time invested is factored in. In the strong scenario, an owner who survived that brutal first location, refined their cost controls, and opened a second location 3 years later using proven systems and centralized purchasing, is now running 2 restaurants, generating $2 million combined in annual revenue, with a tightened margin closer to 10% thanks to operational efficiencies unavailable to a single struggling location, netting closer to $180,000 to $200,000 a year in owner profit, plus a business now worth several times that in potential resale value. The mistake almost everyone makes walking into this business is assuming the differentiator is the food. It rarely is. Plenty of restaurants with genuinely excellent food fail every single year, and plenty of restaurants with merely decent food thrive for decades. What actually separates survival from the 80% failure rate is whether the owner treated this as a perishable inventory, thin margin operations business that happens to serve food, rather than a creative expression that happens to need a business plan attached to it. The chefs who make real money almost always stop being just chefs somewhere along the way and started being operators instead.